There are a few things that I learned after using the M1 iMac for a couple of weeks. Some are great, some are not so great. Today I'm going to walk you through the entire experience, and for each part I'll tell you what I liked, what I didn't like, and I'll also put it in context for different types of users. Then I'll talk about who this iMac would be a good fit for and who might want to look at another product or maybe just wait a bit. Kicking things off with the display, let me start with what I liked. The display itself is fantastic. It's definitely something that you need to factor into the price when you're doing comparative shopping. Like if you look at something like the 24-inch LG Ultrafine 4K, you're looking at about $700 for the display alone. Now back to the iMac display, the image quality is very good. It's crisp, it's bright, and it's color accurate, so you can use it for photo and video editing. And when you're viewing content on it, things look great. It's also a 4.5K display, meaning that you can watch your favorite shows, movies, or YouTube content at 4K. So in terms of the actual quality of the display, I don't really have anything to complain about. For my use, I would have liked for it to be a 27-inch display for a couple of reasons. First, I think the majority of users who are going to use this iMac are going to use it as a single display machine. And since it's a device that should last for at least the next 5 years, I think a larger display would be great. Now, if you're more than just a casual user and you do plan on doing photo or more important video editing, then having more room for your timeline and all the different bins that you use is definitely a bonus. Now, my main workstation has 6 monitors, it's right over there, so I'm used to working with multiple monitors and a ton of desktop real estate, but that's really an extreme setup that I designed for my workflow. But even if you only add one display to the iMac, you run into a couple of issues. First, it kind of ruins the appeal of an all-in-one. And second, your additional display isn't going to match. And because of the white bezels, which don't get me wrong, I happen to actually like, but that difference will be more noticeable. Now, of course, you can find displays with white bezels, but your choices are much more limited. Now, the last thing that I want to point out about this display is that it's glossy, and there isn't a matte version. This may not matter to every user, but I do want you to be aware of this if you have a window that's behind you. Now, the display is actually pretty bright, so you'll be able to see it, but it is quite reflective. Now, next I want to talk about the ports. So first, there are 2 models. The base model comes with 2 Thunderbolt/USB 4 ports, and the higher end model, the one that I got, comes with those 2 ports plus 2 additional USB 3 ports and an Ethernet port that's built into the power brick. Now, both models also come with a 3.5mm headphone jack, so you can use wired headphones or a headset. Now, going back to the ports, first, because I don't plan on using an additional monitor, I will only use 1 port because I don't want to have a bunch of things just dangling from the back of the device. So rather than doing that, I'm going to use 1 port, connect it to a hub, and then have everything else connected that way. Now, with my M1 Mac Mini, I don't mind attaching individual items because it sits on my desk, so all the cables are hidden in the back, but with the iMac, I just want a cleaner setup. Now, if you do plan on using multiple ports with like external drives or maybe an additional display, then I would probably opt for the 4-port model, and also keep in mind that there are no USB-A ports. And I know we're trying to move away from USB-A, but I also know that a lot of users still have USB-A accessories, so just make sure that you pick up some inexpensive adapters, and I'll link to the ones that I use in the description. Now, one thing that I really wish they would have added was an SD card slot. And if they found a way to either build it into the side or the bottom, that would have been really cool. Now, like I said before, I can hook up a hub, which will give me that functionality. And I also concede that while myself and a lot of other creators would really appreciate it, the majority of users wouldn't take advantage of that feature. Now I want to talk about these accessories, which is kind of a mixed bag. Aesthetically, I love the fact that Apple created matching accessories. So the brushed aluminum on the Magic Keyboard, mouse, and trackpad perfectly matches the base of the iMac. And that gives the whole system a very cohesive look. Now, going to the individual accessories, then things don't always hold up. So for example, starting with the keyboard, I love the Touch ID, okay? It's awesome, and I would definitely upgrade to Touch ID if you buy the base model, which comes with, again, the same keyboard, but you don't get Touch ID. But you can just upgrade when you check out. Now, having said that, while I like how this keyboard looks and I like that functionality, I really don't like typing on it. So I don't know if it's the keys, if like they seem like they're spaced properly, but I don't know if it's because they're flat, they're just not comfortable to type on, and I definitely find that I make more mistakes when I use this keyboard than my main keyboard. And ergonomically, it's just not a keyboard that I like using. Now, I almost wish Apple would release like a standalone Touch ID that would be magnetized to either the base or the trackpad, something like that, and then I could use a different keyboard and still have that Touch ID functionality. Now, moving on to the Magic Mouse, I actually kind of like it. I mean, it doesn't have the same ergonomic design of my MX Master 3, but I do like the added built-in functionality. Now, charging it, on the other hand, I was really surprised that it wasn't updated with a new design. And the fact that you can't use it while it's charging could be really frustrating. Now, the Magic Trackpad, on the other hand, is absolutely fantastic. Like, I have nothing but good things to say about this. It's big, it's responsive, it's accurate, and there are a ton of useful gestures. And if you've gotten value from this video, give it a thumbs up. It lets me know what kind of content you like so that I can make more of it. And I still see that over 90% of you are new viewers, so hit that subscribe button. Next, I want to discuss the design. Now, I love how this iMac looks. It's elegant, it's sleek, and I actually really like the white bezels with this particular design. I think that because of the muted chin and the brushed aluminum base, black would just stand out a lot more. And it would be sort of like having an iPad Air 4, but because the chin is another color, it would stand out even more because the black would separate the display from the chin, again, even more. And practically speaking, with where we have it, which is in our living room, it just looks nicer with this sort of lighter feel to it, again, because of the white bezels. So that's something that I wasn't sure I was gonna like when I first saw it, but I actually do like. I'm still not a huge fan of the fact that the chin is a different color than the base, but it doesn't end up standing out to me as much as it did when I first saw it. I really like the overall clean look with just one cable. Like I said previously, you sort of lose this as soon as you start adding dongles or external drives. Now, in my initial impressions video, I mentioned just how impressed I was with this thin design and how light the entire computer is. Now, in practice, there are pros and cons. So first, the pros. If you need to move it, or if you have it on the counter and you're just rotating it because you're moving around or you're trying to show someone something, then it's great. And there's very little traction on the bottom here, so you can very easily just get it to be exactly how you want. Now, the problem with this lack of traction and it being so light is that if you bump it, it will definitely move. And I also did a test where I stepped on the power cord and then kicked the portion that was connected to the iMac, and I can confirm that it will absolutely pull your iMac right off the desk. Now, Apple doesn't advertise this cable to have the MagSafe functionality that we used to have on MacBooks, so it's not designed to release, but I just wanted to make sure that you know to be careful with the placement of the power brick. Now, next I want to move on to the speakers. And in my initial review, I mentioned that I was really happy with these speakers, and after using them for a couple of weeks, I'm even more impressed. Now again, I want to mention that I'm not comparing them to dedicated speakers, but the sound coming out of the iMac is really impressive. It's full, there's a good amount of bass, like obviously not overwhelming bass, but a good amount. And I also noticed that the mids and especially the highs don't sound hollow or harsh, which was something that I was initially worried about. Now, with where we currently have the iMac, we actually use it to play music in our living room instead of using our Bluetooth speakers. Now, the microphone is another strong suit of the M1 iMac. It's a 3-array microphone and it's designed to focus on the speaker and then attenuate or reduce background noise. Now, it's easily good enough for video calls, and it would also work well for recording tutorials. Obviously, it's not going to compete with a dedicated microphone, but considering how far away from it you are, it's actually quite good. And here's a sample of the audio recorded when sitting at a comfortable distance from the iMac. Here's a quick sample of what the audio is going to sound like on your iMac. I'm sitting about maybe 1.5 to 2 feet away from the display. So this should give you a pretty good idea of what the audio will sound like on a video call. Now, moving on to the camera, I would say that it's pretty good. It's better than the 720p cameras that we have on the M1 MacBook Air and MacBook Pro, but there's a ton of processing being done by the M1 chip's image signal processor. So essentially, it almost looks like HDR gone wrong in some situations where it's working really hard to bring up the shadows in the dark areas of the image, and it ends up sometimes looking artificial. Now, the good part is that it's software, so it can be modified using a macOS update, and I would love to have a little more control over the exposure and the amount of processing, let's call it, that's being done to the image. Now, in reality, for video calls, it's really good, and I'm just being a video nerd over here, but I'm curious to know what you guys think. So here's a sample of what the footage looks like. And here's a sample of what the camera is gonna look like. I'm in a pretty well lit environment, but to be fair, the lights are coming from the side, a little bit from over there and from the back, so it could be pretty challenging for the camera because, again, you can see the windows behind me are super bright, but this will give you an idea of what the image quality is gonna look like in a pretty well lit room. I really think they should have used the same ultra wide camera that we have on the M1 iPad Pro and then enabled center stage. It would almost be more beneficial with an iMac because you're not really gonna move it around, and it would be super convenient for the camera to track you and then reframe the shots so that if you have it in your kitchen or in an instructional environment, you can move around and again, stay perfectly framed. Now, as far as performance, I think that the iMac is very good for what it is. If you're looking for a powerful all-in-one that would do great for overwhelming majority of casual users, you can absolutely get by with the base model and even with 8 gigs of RAM. Now, personally, I would recommend upgrading to 16 gigs if you can afford it, and then get as much internal storage as you think you need, unless you're okay with an attached external SSD. Now, I did do a comparison of some of the most popular drives, and they are all significantly less expensive than upgrading the internal storage, again, with the caveat that you're sort of messing up this clean all-in-one look. Now, if you're a creator and you're gonna be doing photo and video editing, definitely go with 16 gigs of RAM, and you might as well upgrade to the 8-core CPU, 8-core GPU model. In addition to that extra GPU core, which is not huge, you'll also get a dual fan setup with a heat pipe versus one fan with a heat sink on the base model. Now, personally, the changes in the cooling system wouldn't be reason enough on their own for me to upgrade. Like, the vast majority of users aren't pushing their iMac hard enough to where they need that additional active cooling from the dual fan design. And for most people, that won't result in a meaningful improvement. If, however, you want the absolute best sustained performance from an M1 iMac, then the higher tier model is the way to go. Ultimately, I think that the M1 iMac is an awesome all-in-one desktop. It looks great, it has plenty of processing power for its target audience, it has a great display, excellent speakers, and a pretty good camera system. I like the way Apple worked the colors into the accessories, and at the same time, I think the Magic Keyboard and Magic Mouse could use some updates. I think some users may want a larger display, maybe an option for a matte finish, and an SD card slot. I'd love to know what you think. Remember that I have links in the description to all the products I talked about. Hopefully this video was helpful. Click on my face to subscribe and then watch one of these videos. You know what I always say? Buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck, and see you soon.